All right, once this guy sits down, we'll start. No pressure. Just his bag fell over, and now he's checking his watch. He's just, oh, hey, how's it going? Just kidding. Hey, my name's Mark Mon. I run our internal analytics and operations teams at Domo. And so I get the privilege of introducing a couple of people on my team. This session, by the way, is Unleash the Beast Within. So if you don't mean to be in this session, you can leave. I'll chase you down and shame you in the hall, though. So quick introduction on our team. So our team is responsible for using Domo within as a software, right? Within Domo as a company. So we're responsible for. I have accountability for the major Domo team, as well as our internal analytics team. Both Jeremy and Laura, who are going to speak to us today, are on that team. Jeremy's been here for, I think, just around 6 years. You might say Domo hasn't been around for 6 years, but it actually has, and Jeremy's been here for most of the time that we've been around. And Laura, I think, has been around for about 4 years. Yeah, just under 4 years, but we'll round up. So Jeremy runs our internal data science team, and Laura supports primarily our chief strategy officer. So she deals with the analytics side of things for partners, a lot of sales, pricing, that kind of stuff. I think I had slides here to welcome you. Welcome. I checked that box. I probably should have had these up earlier. So Jeremy put this slide or this picture up with him wearing sunglasses, and Laura's was much more professional. So I think she went out and did like an actual photo shoot with a hat on so that she could match Jeremy's. So anyway, excited for you guys to hear about what they have to offer. We get to do some crazy stuff with the product. We're always asked to push the limits of the product, and so hopefully you'll be able to learn from them. So I'll hand the time over to Jeremy, and then he'll introduce Laura when it's her, and then we'll do Q&A after. So Jeremy Morse.
Thank you. All right. That was good, because Laura was going to make a joke about her picture being better than mine, I think. Who knows? Time will tell. Okay, so like Mark said, we're going to cover beast mode. I'll do some intro, kind of theoretical discussion. Laura will get into the nitty-gritty and do some demos. We are, the first thing that we wanted to look at is just kind of motivate. I mean, I think probably everyone in the audience understands that beast mode is a large part of card building and things like that. But these are a couple of statistics that we came up with as we're preparing for this discussion, and you can see there, almost 59% of all cards have beast modes on them. On average, those beast modes have almost 5 distinct functions inside of them. And so some of those, the point is the beast modes can get fairly complicated. And then you can see there a list of the top 5 functions that get used. And these happen to be, we'll actually cover a little bit about each of these functions as we go through the discussion. Excuse me. But before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty, I want to take us all on an existential journey. So hopefully you'll join me in that. So what is beast mode? The obvious answer is that beast mode's a feature that actually exists within the card builder or the analyzer that allows you to add custom calculations into your cards. So if you're in the analyzer, you'd see down at the bottom left there's a button that says Add Calculated Field. I think it actually used to say beast mode back in the day. Mark told you I was an old timer, right? Once you click on that button, you'll get a window that looks like this, which you can write some SQL-looking code in, and that will add a calculation to the card. So that's all well and good, but I think if we really want to get in the bottom right panel of this comic with these snakes, right, we have to go a level deeper and ask ourselves what the analyzer is. And so the analyzer on its face creates cards, but really in the background, the analyzer is creating a SQL query. So the analyzer is really a point and click SQL query builder. And that's one of the ways that I like to think about it. So what does that mean? Well, if we look at, this is a SQL query, and it is in fact the SQL query that would likely have been generated for this card, okay? Now, one just side comment, we won't go into a bunch of details about SQL right now. There's a ton of resources online. You can learn a little bit more about that. But the point is, so we can actually map the items on the card builder to the SQL query. So for example, the items that you're putting into the X and the Y axis in the series, those are all going to show up in the select statement. Even any kind of beast mode or calculation that you're asking the card to do, all of that stuff's going to end up in the select statement. There's going to be a where statement if you selected filters. And then depending on the card type and things of that nature, certain of those columns will show up in the group by statement. And then lastly, there's likely going to be an order by statement if you selected things that, to sort by. So hopefully that gives us a good picture of mapping the one world into the other world. And when I find that my beast modes are potentially not working the way that I thought they would be, it's often because of a misunderstanding of how they slot into the SQL query, right? So what does it all mean? So to fully understand beast mode, you have to understand this linkage between the way that you've designed the card and the SQL that's going to be generated. Also, you should remember that the card builder, or the analyzer is going to run one query and only one query. So that means that if you need any sort of pre-processing, if you assume that your beast mode is going to operate on aggregates or something that's generated in that query, it's just not going to work, right? And then the other thing is just to be particularly conscious of the group by statement, and a lot of the issues that I've seen personally are because the group by statement can make that query, the query can only really see within those groups, and therefore it can't see outside. So the biggest example of that is if you're doing some sort of a percentage of total calculation, the beast mode won't calculate a percentage of total because it can't see across those groups to calculate the total for the denominator, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Now, I will mention that percentage of total is pretty common, and there's actually options within the chart builder, specifically in the data label settings, that allows you to do that. So you don't need a beast mode. And then another comment, just that as Laura goes through her demo, she's going to show you a couple places where you might think you need a beast mode, but you probably don't because we've moved some of that functionality into the card builder itself. So. A summary outline of the things that we're going to cover. We're going to cover logical aggregation and date functions in Laura's demos. This is a list of the basic things that those functions will do. And then just to go into a little bit more detail, moving on from the functionality to what you can do with those things. Logical functions is all going to be about data cleaning and grouping and bucketing and writing custom filters. Then we'll do some interesting things with custom sums and averages, kind of combining logical functions and aggregation. And then finally, there'll be a section on date functions. So after that, Laura will walk through some things that we're calling eye candy. So in particular, how to create a multiple summary number, and also how to do some progress indicators in table cards. And you can do that because HTML, you can actually inject some, a subset of HTML tags into a table and have it render. So that can be pretty fun. All right. So the other thing that I'll go through, and then after this section, you won't have to listen to me anymore until the Q&A, should you ask me a question, right? Anyway, case statements. I want to walk through case statements. You saw from the very first slide that case statements are kind of by far the most common function that we see. And there are also a couple of gotchas that we find that when we're working with them. So you know that a case statement goes case, when, and then ends with an end statement, right? So the logical statements will go when, condition, then, some action, right? So fairly simple. You can have multiple when statements within a case. Those when statements are evaluated sequentially. So what happens in the background is that the case statement will be evaluated for every row of the data set. And for a single row, it will evaluate each of the when statements sequentially. When it finds, I think this is the next point, it will finish when it finds the first true condition. So let's say that you have 200 conditions, and the second one is true. It's not going to evaluate the remaining, whatever that is, right? Is that 98 or something? Yeah, okay. Math. And then the else statement is evaluated last. So if none of the when statements are true, it's going to evaluate the else statement. And lastly, the else statement is conditional. So what that means is that if none of your when statements are true, the case statement will return a null value. And so understanding all of these things, you can kind of take advantage of how they work. So we'll look at a couple of examples. So the first one is that often you can create a case statement with redundant information. So in particular, the information here you'll see is redundant to this case statement. If you were to rewrite it like this, it's going to return the same exact output, right? And not only is it going to return the same exact output, but it's going to you're going to cut in half the number of logical evaluations that you have to do, right? One point here about the order, if in that bottom query, if you were to reverse the order, then bad things would happen, right? So let's say that revenue is 5 and you reverse the order, then 5 is certainly less than or equal to 20. It's going to hit that statement first and exit and return 11 to 20, right? So the order is super important. And so you can use that to your advantage, or it can bite you, right? The other thing is that case statements don't allow for OR logic. So this statement, frankly, in the beast mode editor, it might evaluate just fine, but it's not going to return what you think it will. What you have to do really, oh, that's cute, right? Anyway, what you have to do is rearrange the query so that it actually evaluates out, right? This evaluates out to OR. It's equivalent. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, with case statements, we often will see this happening. And if you think about it, I think you're going to have some unintended consequences with this one. So if you think through how the case statement evaluates, it's going to evaluate every row in sequence. And let's say that the color is blue, then it's going to return the sum of revenue for that row, which is just that one value, right? So no worky, right? And this is one of the things that Laura will show, I think, pretty quickly in the demo, is just how to fix that and how to get it to do what we think was intended. So from here, we're going to have the computer switched over to the demo, and Laura will talk at us.
Okay, so the first card we're going to build is this one on the left here. So we're going to use a mix of a few functions, aggregations, and also some logical statements. I'm actually going to build it from scratch, but this will be the finished project, essentially. So I've loaded some sample data in here. I've got just a projects data set. And this is one row per project that shows us some consumption of hours and different attributes about the project team we've worked with here. I'm going to select. And when I first get into the card builder here, I want to make a point to say you don't always need a beast mode. Hopefully you've learned that just by using the card builder. There's a lot of built-in aggregation that the card will do for you. So you can see if I drag a value up to my y-axis here, there's built-in aggregations already listed here. So if I just wanted a sum, and it's something I can accomplish with filters, I'll just use a card type that will work for that, and I won't do any extra work that I don't need to do. The view that I want to create, though, is putting two things on the same axis that make sense next to each other. And in order to isolate those metrics, I do need a beast mode here. So we're going to want to see total projects by industry. I'm just going to filter down the industries here so we don't have quite a convoluted view. High tech, financial services. Okay. So I'll open the beast mode editor here. You also notice you have some features listed down below. So this is the same list of fields that exist in your data set. It also includes any beast modes that have already been created. you can surface those by just adding an equal sign here. You can double click these and they'll populate into your formula. And you'll also note that the symbol you see next to the field determines what kind of a data type it is. So the functions list in the middle here, this is super useful. I don't memorize every function that I can use in MySQL, and I don't know the syntax. That's something I'll just Google right before I use it, forget it, and then I'll go through the same thing the next time I use it, potentially. So all the supported functions are listed here, and when I click into these, you can see the function description pops up. So it tells you exactly what's returned when you use this function, and it even includes the syntax for how to use it, including whether it's single quotes or where the commas go, everything. So this is also really helpful for troubleshooting. So the first one we're going to create is going to be total projects. And let's say in our data set that we have a ton of different project statuses, but for this purpose, only a few apply. And I only want to see active and completed, so ones that have been assigned to a team, they're off the ground running, they've got hours billing already. And in order to isolate those, I've got to call out those specific statuses by referencing them in my logic. So I'll start with case 1. You'll notice it'll populate the field for you. Oh, wrong one. And I'm going to use an in statement here. And another gotcha is I have to be exact. So if I had active listed lowercase in my data set, it won't return. So I'll need to call that out exactly as it appears in my data set here. And then when this condition is true, either of these, I just want it to return a 1. And if it's not true, just return a 0. And I'm going to end that. So like Jeremy mentioned earlier, this is going to evaluate on a row-by-row basis for when this condition is true. I know that only one status can exist in a row, and so I know this will work with my data set. In order to surface the aggregate of total projects for use in the card, I'll wrap the aggregator around it. So we'll have a sum here. And I'll validate that guy. The next one we're going to do is the completed projects. And I know I just wrote a beast mode that was very similar, so instead of starting from scratch, I'm just going to double click, and we're just going to edit the one I already created. So by double clicking, it populated the entire beast mode into here, and all I'm going to do is just remove this part where I reference active. And I'll validate that. And then in order to look at the percentage, so percentage of projects that have been completed, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I've created both the numerator and the denominator already, so all I'm going to do is add the equal sign in here. I know that completed projects are going to be my numerator. I'll add one division symbol, and then total projects on the bottom. And I'm just going to call this project completion. So by doing it in this order, I've saved myself time. I'll validate that. Now, the last one, which is a really simple function, is just a count distinct. This is one that we use a lot to surface how many opportunities, how many customers, whatever it be, industries, exist in the data sample in our card. For this purpose, I'm going to reference customers. And you can see as soon as I start typing count, I can populate the function. And in this data set, an account ID represents a unique customer for us. So pretty simple. This is what's going to go in our summary number. All right, so 57 customers. I'll hit apply. Now that I have my beast modes finished, I can just build the view. So we know we've got industry on our x-axis. The percentage completion is going to be the ticker symbol that we see. That's going to go in our y. And then I like to see the total of something on the left and the smaller proportion just next to it. So total projects will be first and completed second. And then if you're like me, you might be repelled by this color scheme. So I'm just going to change the colors really quickly. Completed projects will make it light blue. Total dark blue. And in order to make our ticker pop, we're going to change it to red. So when I design cards, I always try to think of the people that are going to be consuming them. As an analyst, my favorite card is a table card, which is the worst card for many other users. And that's because I like to see a ton of details. But if you're thinking of the person who's going to see this, maybe this is a manager of these project teams. They just want a really high level. You know, what are the total projects in flight, and how many have we completed thus far? The other thing Jeremy mentioned, I'll show you really quickly, is this data label settings. This is where you can find the % of total that he referenced, so you don't have to do extra work to create that. In this case, I just want us to display the value here. And I'll make this a %. Okay, so that's that card. The next functions we're going to look at are going to be date related. So these are cards and beast modes that are already created. I'll just be explaining how we built them and what they're doing. You'll notice in this card, this is now a data set that shows users. So users created in a system at any given time. And our x-axis here is a day name. So one thing that the card analyzer has is, I'm sure you've used many times, you can configure what you're viewing on the x-axis within the parameters that are available here. So I could view it by date, but if I had a date field, that would serve up the actual raw date. It wouldn't show a day name like this, month, quarter, et cetera. So in this case, I actually just want to see the name of the day of the week. In order to do that, I've got a simple function called day name available to me, and I reference the field here. And it just returns in text the actual name of that day. That's what I add on the x-axis here. And then to partner with that, because we've got a text, the card won't know how to sort those in order. It's just a string, and if I drop this sort here, you're gonna notice it makes the days go out of order. So the day sort is simple. It's just a day of week. That returns an integer, which is representative of the day of the week. And I actually use that here in the day sort to put them back. The beast mode that we're using to surface the users here is called average users per day. And what we're doing is we're looking in our sample to say, show me all of the users divided by the distinct dates available in this sample. So on average, how many users were created per the dates in this sample. So user ID, we take a count here. We divide by the count distinct of the days. So we can see in this data sample, Wednesday, on average, has more users created than any other day per this graph. The summary number I'm going to skip because I'm going to cover one that's very similar in the next card. So I'll move ahead to this guy. Okay, so this is a period over period card, which is really common amongst our customers wanting to view two different date grains and compare them dynamically on the same x-axis. So we've preserved the day name here, and I keep the day sort in here. But we've got now two different beast modes that surface the users created in the last 30 days, as well as the users created the 30 days prior to that, so 30 to 60. So let's look at these. Okay, so last 30 days. So current date is a function that's used across many, many date-related beast modes, and that's so that you can keep a period that you're comparing dynamic. So it always looks at whatever the date of today is, and you're always looking at a relevant view on your card. So there's no filtering. I don't have to go in and set a default to look at last 30 days. By adding it into the beast mode here and referencing the current date, I'm able to always keep it up to date. So the count is wrapped around anytime the current date minus 30 is greater than that created date, we just return the user ID. So you'll notice I don't have an else condition here. And if you think about what's returned, so user ID, anytime you're referencing a count, it takes literally a count of whatever exists in that field. It's not a sum. So if I put else NA, it would still be counted in that aggregation, if that makes sense. So we skip the else in this case. The next one we'll look at is the 30 to 60. It's essentially this exact same beast mode. All I've done is add an additional piece of logic that says now isolate between 30 and 60. So we're still referencing the current date. We've just flipped our sign, so we're saying now show us anything 30 days to 60 days. And then we do the same thing where we surface that user ID and take a count. Now, in the first card you saw where I created that percent change, that's exactly what we're doing here. I've switched it to a sum, so we're able to aggregate just the users where this condition applies, and just dividing the numerator by denominator here. Oh. One other thing, how many of you guys have built a beast mode that wouldn't work? I've had so many where, yeah, and you get the dreaded invalid and it won't validate. Or it does validate, but it doesn't return what you think it's supposed to be returning. So some tips for troubleshooting. Every time I have something that won't validate, so let's say I'm missing a parentheses here. I go in, it won't validate. To start, I'll isolate each piece of the beast mode. So you can actually comment out by doing a -- space or a /* to isolate pieces of code and validate. So that piece works. I know that's not the issue here. Once I go and do the same to the top part, we're going to see that this bottom line is where my issue is. Another tip for troubleshooting would be if you have something that's validating but it's not returning the results you're expecting, I'll flip my card to a table card and examine how the beast mode behaves on every single row. So maybe there's a different condition I need to adjust with logic that I didn't, and I can see exactly how it behaves before making the change. The other thing is these are pretty simple. There's not a ton of parentheses to wrangle here. In some cases, you'll get into beast modes that are quite a bit more complicated and have a lot more lines of code. In those cases, I'll actually pop it into a text editor. So a lot of text editors have built-in functionality where you can hover over to see where your parentheses start and end. And that's been really helpful for me to sort through where I'm missing or where something's misplaced. So I'll fix that guy. And that's that card. And then the last one is more of a fun one, which is, I love it because it's a table card, but it's kind of a fancy table card because we've got 2 metrics surfaced in our summary number. This is back to a sample projects data set. And I'm surfacing a progress indicator so that, let's say I'm managing these project teams, I can actually filter by lead here and see how is this project lead performing. Jeremy's performing very poorly. And oh, I'm doing very well. So we're going to look at this progress indicator. So this is not an image. It's actually a Unicode character that I surface in a concat statement. I'm going to have to zoom out so you can see these 2 statements here. Maybe that's not big enough. OK, so I've got 2 listed in here. You'll notice the one at the bottom, I have the actual calculation was originally in the beast mode. I ended up moving this up into the ETL. So just to keep things clear and so it's easier to write beast modes on, I also knew this is a field that's going to be referenced when this data set is used commonly. And so moving it up into the ETL just makes it easier for everyone that's going to use this field. Another thing about managing data sets at scale is that people will create probably 5 versions of the same beast mode. And by moving fields that they can reference, you might cut some of that out. So the concatenate tag just puts a string together for you. But in the case of the table card, you're actually able to use HTML to create a tag that's going to show something cool on your row. So what we're looking at here is the div tag starts. The single quotes determine which parts are put together in the concatenate statement. And the only part that is logic-based is this center piece, which determines what color the character should be. So you can see I'm referencing this when the % consumed is greater than 1, so we're over hours. I want it to show red. If it's greater than 80, so we're getting close, I want it to show yellow. Else, show it green. So we're fine, we're just getting off, and no concern there. The rest of this tag here just determines the actual style for itself. So where it lands in your row, how big it is, whether it's bold or not, the position. And then this tiny dot here is the actual dot that you see in the card. But I could use a control character and just add in anything you wanted here. So you could Google Unicode characters and pop that in here. Change it to anything that makes sense for you. It could be a check mark or some sort of a logo. And now we see the color surface. So it's a bit of a middle road because you're giving something to the viewer that as soon as they look at the card, if they see a ton of red, they know something's up. There's still enough detail on here that they can dive in. And now I'm going to show this summary number. So again, this is another concatenate statement. Right now I have two really simple metrics in here, which is maybe not the most relevant for our viewers. So I've got a total of count, project IDs, that's our unique project, and the distinct industry. The div part of this tag here actually sets the summary numbers on top of each other. If I didn't have this in here, you'd see them listed one after the other, which can be kind of not the best to look at. So I recommend if you're going to make multiple metrics in your summary number that you separate them out on top of each other. I'm going to change this one. So say we want something that's more relevant, like projects that are over hours. So I'm going to add another statement in here, in case when my % hours consumed is greater than 1, then 1, else 0. And you can see I've got the sum wrapped around it already. This is going to return anytime the project was over hours. And then I'm going to go ahead and rename it. So I don't want it to say industries represented. I'm going to say projects over hours. Ooh. Oh, look at that. Classic. I forgot the end in my logic statement. It'll get you. Okay, now it's valid. You also notice, so in this view, this actually isn't red. So in that concatenate tag, I had a default to turn these different font colors. So there's default colors you can reference if you don't have a strong preference on what shade of blue it is. You can just say blue. So I've said red for this, but you'll notice in this view, it doesn't render. As soon as I save and close this guy, we'll see it switch and render in the color we wanted. And with that, we'll move to Q&A. So we can roll back to the, oh, actually, one more slide. I put this in here for fun, but I don't know if anyone will be up to the challenge. Sorry, can you go to the next slide? I don't have the clicker. Oh, yes. Okay, so there's a guy that works at Domo that built this insane beast mode, and all it's doing is this sales chart piece. So these are actually sales charts embedded in a row on a table card, and every single bar is actually programmed uniquely, and this big chunk of code is the code that you would use to generate this one part of the table card. So now you can, I guess, understand why you'd want to use a text editor, because these things can get really out of hand. Look for an email in the next few weeks. Once this sessions wrap up, we'll send out some materials so you guys have copies of all the beast modes you've seen here today, so you don't have to take a photo and try to work with it later. Okay, awesome. Questions? Thanks. Yeah. Oh, do we have a mic?
Here, I'll
runner?
run the mic. If you can ask questions like complete opposite sides of the room, then these guys they'll get a
He
lot
needs
better.
some steps today, so let's
Yeah,
really spread it out here.
so I have two questions. First questions regarding using beast mode in beast modes, because you had multiple examples. When, for example, we have 30, 60 days. So, for example, let's imagine we need to change. So we don't need to change each beast mode, which uses this like values. So we use beast mode in beast mode. Is it planned to add this feature?
We got this question earlier.
Yeah, I think that the
I
product
talked to
team-
PNAV in
What?
the hallway. You want
What?
me? I talked to PNAV in the hallway. You want me to answer?
Oh, yeah.
Did he answer that question?
Yeah. So I just talked to the product team, and yes, the short answer is yes, that's planned.
He's actually just going to answer all of them, so go ahead.
Go ahead, throw them all at me.
A question regarding multi-lines in beast mode in
Yeah.
summary number. We try to use that, but actually when you have multiple lines in summary numbers, it pushes your main chart in the bottom, and it overlaps by main div. So for example, if you have chart with legend, legend is not visible because it was, do you face this issue?
Oh, from the top view, you
right.
mean?
Yes.
Yeah. So those, I mean, I think you just have to click in the card to get that to surface. How many were you adding to the card, just out of curiosity?
So we have a really complex beast modes like you showed on the last screen, and we have like we need 3-4 KPIs shown
Okay,
in
and the
bottom
same
lines,
thing.
and it really pushes chart on the bottom.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's just going to happen. You have to understand that when you're designing the card. One suggestion might be to go to 2 columns, right? So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. How do we get the list of all the beast modes in Domo if you're an administrator in Domo? Do we have a function or something?
Yeah, of course. First off, I forgot to mention this in my presentation. I had it in my notes, but of course I like, deer in headlights. If you go to the Help Center and search beast mode, there's a ton of resources on there of pre-written beast modes that do all kinds of things that you can actually copy and paste and just swap fields out. For the ones that you've seen here today, we should be making those available to you with post-conference resources. So we should get a link, I believe, to the session, and included in that will be the beast modes that you've seen here today.
Beast modes you have in your instance. Like let's say we have multiple users creating the beast modes, from their account. So if I'm the Domo administrator, is there a way that I can get the list of all the beast modes created by, all the users? Because sometimes we might want to organize them in a better way, and right now you have to literally look at them one by one. So,
Yeah, that's a good question. And not only that, but they're kind of separated by data set and card, right? So that basically, there's not a feature currently inside of Domo that would allow you to do that. But I know that the product team is aware of that issue, and you might just talk to your client services people and make them aware that that's something that you'd like to see.
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
One more question. How do we transfer the ownership of beast modes? For example, when the employee leaves the company, we want to change the ownership of the beast mode. Is it currently possible? Or?
I don't know. So I don't know that users own beast modes. Is that something you've experienced? Like if somebody leaves the company and the beast modes get deleted?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes I don't have access, so
Yeah.
I try to search it and then I won't find it. So
Okay.
not sure if they're locking it or if,
Right.
because I haven't seen it in my account, but I
Okay.
did experience it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, maybe we talk about that after or something. I don't know that
Maybe
I've
on
seen
the
that.
card or something.
If I'm new to SQL, is there a particular one that I should look at to learn?
Beast mode or resources or?
Just SQL in general?
Yeah, basically, because I know
yeah.
some people in my office might do Redshift or Oracle or Microsoft. I mean, there just seems to be
Right.
little differences.
Yeah, there are some slight differences. You might start with MySQL as a good starting place. Or I know that there's something called SQLite as well that would, but the differences I've seen are differences in simple syntax. So for example, MySQL would require backticks around a variable with a space, and Redshift or Postgres would require double quotes or something like that. And then there can be differences when you get more advanced, like when you get into windowing functions and things like that. But really, if you're learning basic or intermediate SQL, any of them should do. But again, like MySQL or SQLite's a good place to start. Yeah.
So I have two quick questions for you. First, is there any clean, easy way to get a clickable URL in a table? So I deal with a lot of content. So if I want to, say, okay, these are the views this video got, and here's a link to the video, and allow a user to then click that link to view what that video is.
Yes.
Is there a clean way to do that?
Yes.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, that's one of the things I debated actually putting that in the table card, but we use that all the time, not necessarily to watch videos, but just to take links and take you elsewhere. As long as you have the URL that you need, you can embed that inside the HTML tag.
Okay.
If you Google, or not Google, I'm sorry, search in the Help Center, there's resources on that specific thing. Yeah.
And the second is I've been trying to wrap my head around, because I kind of guessed that it was a point and click kind of interface for MySQL when I first saw it.
Yeah.
But there's parts of it that seem to not really follow that. And specifically, when I'm doing email reporting, we have a lot of rates, open rate, click-through rate, et cetera, that I always want to be percentages. Yet there's no way to do it in ETL, and it doesn't seem to be any way to do it in beast mode to make it so that those fields are always as percentages when I add them to a new report. So is there a way that I'm just not seeing, or is that just kind of not a practicality of the platform?
So if I understand you correctly, let's say that you have a click-through rate on your data set, and you want by default for that click-through rate to be a percentage in any card that you build.
Yeah, like, so in the ETL, it's coming as a decimal.
Right.
And then what I'd have to do is I'd go and, select average and then set it to a percentage in the card.
That's
But
right.
that's just, it's, when you're building, 300 of these things, it gets a little.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
tiresome.
interesting. I mean, it's a data type constraint in that case, because how does it know the difference between that and a dollar or some other representation?
Yeah.
I don't know if we've had that come up before.
No.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that the product teams talk about is expanding the kinds of data types that are in the data center, and that's a good example where if in the data center you can specify that it's a number or a text or data or a date, and so there's really only 4 or 5 kinds. So I think in the future what you'll start to see would be being able to specify that it's a phone number, or being able to specify that it's a zip code or something of that nature. And I think that's what we would have to do if we were going to, automatically always calculate something as a percentage. We would have to, live at the data set level.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
thanks.
yeah,
Good question.
So as of right now, when you're creating a beast mode, when you make multiple when statements on top of each other, if you run an item against that case statement, and if it comes back as response positive for the first statement or whatever, it will actually be taken out of the pool for all of the ones after that. Is there
That's
a
right.
way to override that so that you can actually have an item fall into multiple different buckets based on an attribute, like if you were using the contain statement or something?
I think.
No.
Or.
I think what you would have to do is you'd have to plan for that in the case statement itself.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
How?
Well, so you would, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say that you, so I had the blue or green example, right? So if something was blue and green, you want it to fall into the blue and the green categories, then you basically have to return blue and green.
Oh, so you have to write a different when statement for every single one.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
You'd have to
For
know
each
what all the
combo.
combinations are.
Yeah.
So you have to write one for every permutation?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And one thing that I'll offer up, sometimes what I will do, and maybe you'll think that I'm insane, which is probably partially true, but I will actually write case statements using Excel. Because if you have a ton of them, then you can just list them all out, and then you can write Excel functions that will generate the when statement, if that makes sense. And then you just copy them all down. Then you can kind of design what the case statement is going to look like without having to actually type a bunch of code.
Oh, okay.
Does that make
Are there
sense?
any product plans to have something like that built into the product in the future?
Yeah, not that I know of. I mean, you might. The other thing that you might consider doing is just having two columns. Like if it's a table card, just have 2 columns, so that then you have one column that returns the primary category and one column that returns the secondary category.
Okay, and
Does
then
that
I
make
guess
sense?
you'd have to create a third one that would actually take both of them if you wanted to find some
Yeah.
overarching theme. You would have to have a third column.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more.
Your dope glasses will offset the difficulty of your question. So
I use the presentation mode to sort of, you get the cards you want and then present them via a link. Is there a way to use beast mode to put in like an image and just have like you could put in a slide from a PowerPoint or something that you generated that is next to your data cards or something like that? So basically like you pull in through the beast mode, like maybe you have the slide on a URL and you can pull it in there. It's almost like you're pulling in text and things like that into alongside your cards when you're presenting it.
Not with beast mode. I mean, you can actually pull, if your image is online and publicly available, you can pull an image into a table card using kind of the similar things that Laura showed earlier. But we do actually have an image card type. And so if you have, and I've used that a couple of times, even here at Domopalooza, right, to present out of Domo, you just take a screenshot of the slide and make an image card out of it. And then you can include it just in the sequence of your slideshow.
Got it.
That might work. Okay.
15
no?
seconds.
Anybody have a 15-second question?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
ambitious.
So, no, it's fine.
4 seconds.
You have very strong ETL modules, and you can do a lot of things with beast mode.
Yeah.
But when do you know when you can use a lot of your modules instead of using beast mode or vice versa?
Yeah.
Is there any rule or a better practicing?
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to you. I mean, you saw that example where I had originally was calculating the % hours consumed in it, like in the beast mode itself, and it just got too complicated. It was too difficult to reference it every time I needed that value, and so I moved it up into the ETL. But it's really just about knowing how you want your card to work. If it's something that needs to be in your data set so that you can reference it in a beast mode, that's a lot easier than creating it and referencing it in the same section, if that makes sense. And then Jeremy mentioned earlier, like you wouldn't want to do kind of % type things in ETL because you'd want it to be relevant to whatever view you're creating in the card.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, if you have any calculation that would take a multi-stage calculation, then you would have to go over into ETL to do that. The other comment is just that the beast mode happens at render time, and so sometimes you can take advantage of the fact that you know that the beast mode is going to render when the card gets viewed. So that's just another thing to consider when you're making the trade-offs between those two strategies.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Let's give Jeremy and
Awesome.
Laura a round of
Thanks.
applause.